That's how we do it when we pull up to the dome.
Well, all right. Welcome to episode number 7 of the Bloodied and Bruised Podcast. I am Taylor. Joining me once again is the one, the only Mystic Miguel Ituarte. Miguel, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Very glad to be here again on your podcast. Excited to talk fights. That's what we do.
Yeah, so before recording, I know I had asked you, and you were pretty busy this week. I had asked you about the fights last night. Told you I'd wait till recording to spoil it for you. Basically, you missed out on not much. I think there were 10 fights. I know there were a lot of cancellations. There were some crazy weight misses. I think somebody missed by like 5.5 pounds or something like that. And there was a couple others that were 2 or 3. And then I think out of the 10 fights, there were 3 finishes, and there was a huge streak where there were no finishes. There were some okay fights. And then in the main fight, Sergey Spivak got the job done in the first round, got a verbal tap to a armbar over Marcin Tybura. But honestly, I didn't even pay that much attention, and that's pretty rare for me. I was out at Buffalo Wild Wings with some kids. And it was relatively uneventful. A kickboxer out of Brazil, Renato Diniz, pulled off an upset and made me a little bit of money, so I'm not complaining about that. But other than that, you didn't miss much. But I know that I had mentioned to you pre-recording as well, UFC 304 over there in London. And I know that we said we kind of wanted to touch on that for a plethora of reasons. So that being said, let's take a little recap, I guess you could say, of the main event, which was Leon Edwards versus Belal Muhammad. Now, I'll start by saying that fight went how I thought it would go, but not quite. I thought that Leon Edwards, he looked great in their first fight. I thought that was kind of going to be the route that this one went for the first 2 rounds, and then the relentless pressure and pushing forward of Belal Muhammad would end up allowing him to take over rounds 3, 4, and 5. Man, was I wrong. He lost round 3, but his pressure was immediately, he was just on him. And people can say what they want about his fighting style, but that dude's good. He's good. He's going to be a hard matchup for anybody at 170, in my opinion. So what do you think? I know that you said that one kind of threw a wrench into some of your thoughts and plans, but
we spent a lot of time the last podcast talking about the UFC and their failure to plan, and we were painting a big scope picture of how I would have handled Conor McGregor, which is, basically offering Conor McGregor a Leon Edwards fight in London under big circumstances, with a belt on the line, and now you've got the makings of one bigger UFCs and stuff. They didn't do any of that, but we had speculated on Leon Edwards, being the champion, and maybe, Conor fighting him in the future. And that would have meant Conor cutting Belal or cutting everybody else in the weight class. But the UFC's done that. They do that in the past. So if the goal was to monetize, I still think that Conor and Leon Edwards is an opportunity that went by the wayside, but that was potentially one of the biggest fights, if not the biggest fight in UFC history, that was on the table. With that said, I saw Leon's claiming he was injured before the fight and stuff like that. This fight, my hats off to Belal. Before the fight, I probably would have picked Leon based on the fact that I thought Leon was still a little bit of a disrespected champion, based on the fact that he did very well in the first fight. The eye pokes aside. But, you kind of forget what you already know, and this was a psychological win for Belal. He had all the motivation in the world because And you could see it now that I've rewatched the Leon Edwards Belal fight, the first one as well, and you could see how upset Belal was that the fight had to be stopped, and it wasn't one of those situations where it was like, he maybe could have continued, but he wanted out. You know what I mean? That was absolutely not the case, and that redemption carried him through this fight. That need to prove himself carried him through this fight. Meanwhile, on the Leon end, whereas I talked about him as a disrespected champion, some of the messages he was sending out in the press conferences and some of his attitude and things like that, I think he took that jump to be thinking he's a superstar. There was that little bit of an attitude where he may have been overconfident, may have been thinking, which you want to be a champion that thinks nobody can beat you and stuff like that. But there's a fine line there, and it was noticeably a different Leon Edwards in attitude in that respect. And I think that is kind of one of the things that I saw Belal taking advantage of, in that he was just coming in workmanlike and had been working to implement his game plan. He already had the blueprint from the first fight and knew what didn't work. And Leon, so he altered his game plan, like you said, relentless pressure from the very beginning. He was backing off a lot in the first round of that first fight. And Leon seemed to come in with the same game plan. And that's how psychological battles are won. And so my hat's off to Belal Muhammad. I remember having a similar feeling when Aljamain Sterling beat in the rematch for the title belt. I'm going to forget his name.
Petr Yan.
Petr Yan. So I remember having that same feeling of like, Aljamain played that mind game correctly. Petr Yan made fun of him for the whole thing, said, you don't win the belt that way, this, that, the other thing. You don't deserve it, this, that, the other thing. And Aljamain put the work in and proved, obviously, that he did deserve it and beat him. You never heard about Petr Yan talking bad about Aljamain after that. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it was one of those games where a superior mind game for a sustained period of time carried the day and got the fighter in the right position as they close the cage, in the right position mentally. Obviously, the physical part, they're all pretty physical. They're all pretty well trained at this point. It's not like, they're going to fall short on some of that stuff. At this point, it's a war of attrition, and the mind carries a lot there. And I think Belal did an exceptional job. There was word that he had trained with Khabib. And, I think Khabib is one of the guys that has shown the strongest focus and mind game that we've seen, in the game. And I think that was a very smart move. It also may be the key for how the UFC should bounce back, because here's the thing is, and the UFC does this, and I'm not a fan of when they do something like this. Let's say they have a guy that they prefer to win. So let's say they were planning to do Leon Conor in October, as for the belt. If Leon won, they would want Leon to win. Mm-hmm. Now, Leon doesn't win, and Belal would suffer for it in some cases in their management style, because it's not what they were planning, and Belal might be having to sit 8 months. Leon has sat with the belt, without the belt. Leon has sat around a long time when he wasn't in their plans. So now, if their plans have gone wrong, what do? Well, I mentioned it in our first podcast, Abu Dhabi, Saudi Arabia. Yeah, I think that the London Stadium would monetize better, but I don't think that those are like places that you're going to be like, well, that was, B class. I think that those people, the Arab world, are looking to present A-class events. I think the fact that you can bring a Muslim champion like Belal to them is an exceptional chip. And I think that I would move, again, if the goal is just to make money, that I would move to tell Michael Chandler, Mike, guess what? Go back to 155 and fight X, Y, or Z again, or, whoever. And Conor gets Belal next fight in Saudi Arabia. and they'll make a fortune. They'll do whatever, that'd be a good main event. The card at the Sphere isn't really a terrific card. I don't like criticizing cards and stuff, but um, that main event with a Muslim in a Muslim country, I think monetizes them and puts them again on an international stage, which is where they want to be. I think they want to go beyond being just an American company. Obviously, they monetize best in the States. It's their biggest market. Most of the athletes are still American, obviously, et cetera, et cetera. But once you start getting to the top level and the cream of the crop, there's a lot of diversity there. It's starting to slant towards that. And embracing that. Like you've got to follow up on Belal at this point. And Belal, again, I'm not sure Belal is going to be on every newspaper. We don't use newspapers anymore, but on every web page cover and on CNN and stuff like that, because he's not that huge a personality. But you take him and put him in a market like Riyadh, and now you've got a guy who could be a legitimate superstar, and they could be monetizing off of that. And so I would stick Conor in there. I'd stick Conor in there with Belal for the next title fight.
So I'll do you one that I guess you could say is pushback. I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I tell you where I think they could make if we're going to talk money. And I know you mentioned it, and I'm a huge. I don't agree with the whole skipping the line thing. I don't like fighters getting special treatment. I think that's super unfair to people that have put the work in. But hey, at the end of the day, unfortunately, business is business, and they're out there to make money, and that's what they're doing, right? But what I think would be a card that can make them a ton of money, I hope it doesn't happen, me personally, just because of what I just said. I don't like special treatment and skipping the line. But you're talking about doing something in the Middle East like Saudi. You're going back to Abu Dhabi with the Muslim fan base and the money behind all those guys. I think a card, or at least the top two tickets for the card, if you will, that could make them a ton of money. And it would be going backwards as far as how they usually stack things with weight classes, the bigger weight classes, headlines, et cetera, et cetera. That's not always the case. I mean, look at Conor McGregor versus Chad Mendes for the interim title. They were the main event. The co-main event was Robbie Lawler and Rory McDonald too. But I digress. Point in that is, I could see if we're going to talk money here, what could make them a lot of money on several different fronts is do an event headlined by Conor McGregor and Islam Makhachev, and then their co-main event, which is the fight that I think needs to be made regardless of what the event is, et cetera, is Belal Muhammad versus Shavkat Rakhmonov. And then there you have two Muslim fighters facing each other in the co-main event for a title. And then you obviously have a Muslim fighter in Islam Makhachev in the main event. And then you have Conor that brings the Conor eyes to the whole thing.
I'm proud of you, buddy. You got a little matchmaking streak in you. That's good. That's good. I'll tell you why I think Belal and Conor is the way to go, even though what you did is very glossy and very good. But you go back to Conor being the X factor. Will Conor show up to fight Makhachev, who's not super popular, is probably a very hard fight for him, and there's not as much topside as winning a third belt in a third weight class, et cetera, et cetera. So Conor being the guy that you're counting on to draw the non-Muslim world to that card in droves, I think you could do either one as long as Conor shows up. And I think
100%.
more likely to show up to Belal if you paint it and draw the picture for him correctly, that he's going to be in the GOAT conversation. He's going to be the first guy to ever hold 3 weight classes and belts. And that was part of the core of our first podcast. And I'll sit by that, is that they haven't done a good job. They're kind of like, hey, Conor's a loose cannon. We don't do anything. It's like, why don't you lay out a plan instead of just throwing your hands up and saying, we don't know how to handle him, and Michael Chandler and him on paper, it's a good fight. That's a good fight. I'd love to see that fight, but it's just a maudlin fight to McGregor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we've gotten this show, and not the fight for the last year plus, because McGregor is just not motivated. So that's the only worry about it. But what you just painted is equally as glossy, especially if you're going to if you're going to try to monetize a Muslim market. So yeah, my hats off to you. You've got a good eye with that stuff. But again, with McGregor being the worry and handling the fighters, I just feel that they've mismanaged him for the last couple of years. Again, kind of, the guy can tell you to go scratch because he's got the money and he doesn't need it. And he's got more money than he's going to make his next fight. You can't say that for most fighters. Most fighters get their check. They're only really monetizing from the fight game. So the check starts to shrink. They're counting on the next fight. Like if they get injured, they're screwed because it's like they lost the income for another 3-6 months or whatever the recovery is. Everybody's worried in that respect. McGregor's on a yacht in the Mediterranean hanging out. He's not worried about money. So money isn't going to motivate him. Even if you take him, we were going to pay him $25 million. Let's pay him 30. Yeah, he'll take your 30 million. He'll 5 million more is 5 million more. He's not going to say no, but will he make the fight at the end of the day? Because he hasn't yet. So that's the only word. But continue. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good. You're good. I think in an ideal universe, for that matchup, right, would have been for Leon Edwards because that's a much more winnable fight. I think the Islam Makhachev is stylistically a bad matchup. I think he would finish Conor probably in the second or third round, maybe earlier, but probably second or third. And I don't think that Belal would finish him, but Belal has surpassed my expectations. It was like after you were talking about mental fortitude earlier. It was like after that first Leon Edwards fight, I don't want to say something clicked, but it was almost like he got, all this hate from people for realistically nothing. He got eye poked in a horrendous fashion. He had every right to behave and act the way he did afterwards. I would assume anybody else would. If they say they didn't, they're probably lying to you, right?
And what it showed is he wanted to keep fighting. That's why you despise, not despise, but disparage fighters in that position is when it looks like, I don't know, but he didn't want to keep fighting. When it's clear that's the situation, maybe the fans are okay to question the fighter. But this guy's body language was like he was robbed. And then when they give him the instant rematch or the rematch, it's not instant, obviously, but when they give him the rematch, it must have been like, thank God, because other people haven't gotten those opportunities, not second chances like that. So when he got, he made the most of it, and like I said, my hat's off to him. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think, as bad as it sounds, and I'm usually really good about this, it's kind of a blur as far as the chain of events, right? I want to say that the Leon Edwards fight happened right after he faced Vicente Luque, obviously got eye poked, had to go on the sidelines, and then that might have been the Stephen Thompson fight next. I don't know. Those three in the order with which they're in kind of runs together. But I know that, maybe the Leon Edwards fight was the last.
So let's go see Leon Rocky Edwards. Look it up. Yeah, I'll look it up for you here.
Or no, Belal Muhammad. But
okay, so Leon Edwards fought Belal Muhammad March 2021, followed it up with Nate Diaz, and then beat Usman, I believe, for the belt.
No. I'm talking about.
And then rematch to Usman. Okay, so let's go to Belal. Belal goes here. So he wasn't champion with Belal the first time it happened, and he was there afterwards. So Leon Edwards fought March 2021 against Belal Muhammad. Belal followed that up 3 months later against Damian Maia, then Stephen Thompson, then Vincent Luque, then Sean Brady, then Gilbert Burns. Nice winning streak, all, veterans or, basically really all veterans that, were probably trying to place there to play gatekeeper. If he had dropped any one of those 5 chances, he wouldn't have been in the title picture, but he basically left him no choice. So you're looking at a guy with sustained mental power to get there in my book.
Right, and that's where I was trying to remember where the Leon Edwards fight the first time sat in there. Because where I think people started to maybe, and I still think he got a lot of disrespect going into this fight, but I think where I noticed personally a big turn was definitely in the Vicente Luque fight. I can remember where I was. I was in a hotel room in Morgan City, Louisiana, watching that, and I was very impressed. It did not turn out the way that I expected it to, because Vicente Luque had already knocked him out, right? But after the Sean Brady fight, I was like, interesting, which is crazy because that's the only finish he's had in the UFC. Might even be one of the handful that he has in his entire mixed martial arts career. And then obviously against Gilbert Burns, and there's the asterisk. Well, Gilbert Burns, hurt his arm or hurt his foot or something to that ilk after the first round. So there's the little asterisk there. But he showed a fortitude and a confidence level coming into this where I've heard the term used before on a couple occasions, and it's a term that I really, really like. It's a moment where someone will not be denied. It's their time. Nothing on paper makes sense. On this one, maybe that's not as much of the rule there, because I think on paper there were things about it that made sense for Belal. But it was a moment where the guy came in. I mean, the way he immediately went after Leon Edwards and just started walking him down, applying pressure from like he was ready to go, like a dog ready to go to a fight, just ready for it, wanting it. As soon as he really started applying the pressure in the first round, probably after the first round and a half, I looked at my cousin and my buddy Tyler and we're like, I think this is it, dude. This dude's getting it tonight. Now, I know we got a lot more rounds. Stranger things have happened. We've seen Leon Edwards pull off some crazy stuff at the last minute against a wrestler before, but I think he surpassed my expectations. He really has. Going into this fight, I thought whoever wins, be it him or Leon Edwards, the big problem is Shavkat Rakhmonov, and I still think he's a big problem, but I think that fight got, on paper, a lot more interesting to me. I think that there's a very good chance that Belal Muhammad gets written off by a lot of people in that matchup, and that's the matchup that needs to happen on paper. It should happen. But I think it's a lot more difficult and not as cut and dry as I personally thought it was going to be. But I'm really happy for the guy.
It feels like Belal, his biggest opponent and worry was that they wouldn't give him the rematch.
Yep.
Once he got it, it was like, he was on clear street for himself. There was no worries. There was nothing else in his life that was challenging him or anything like that. And I think Leon, like we said with Leon, I think Leon was starting to get into that, Instagram, viewers and champion, now with repeat defenses and stuff. You start to get pedigree and you start to change the mindset. If you can't handle that, and, like I said, I feel like other things were important to him, not Belal, because Belal didn't worry him and he didn't change his game plan. So, I think that's a good assessment. I think I'm not going to get Sharbaba, that fellow's name right, but he's a wall. He's a frightening opponent. But, I think especially with the roster having slanted towards Eastern Europeans recently, I think that if there's ever a time where you can skip over a guy just for one fight, because you could have him come in and smash Conor if Conor happens to be Belal, or you could have Belal just take him on after Conor, and gift Belal. The Conor fight's also a cherry fight because there's not a fighter on the planet who wouldn't take it.
Oh,
Even
yeah,
if
100%.
they lose to it, they feel they'll monetize. Being opposite that guy should make you more money. So it becomes very interesting. But they're not, this is kind of speculative because Conor's not even really in the picture. He's got the Michael Chandler fight program for the end of the year, supposedly, or whatever. So I think you're talking in real world, and I'm still in my fantasy world because, but I think Belal is maybe in the Leon fight. Maybe it's because Leon. I never pictured Leon as being super tall, but he looked big and tall in front of Belal, which means Belal might be a little bit undersized, and that, I'm impressed with the guy to the point where I'd like to see him reel off a couple of defenses and not be a once and done champion.
Yeah, same. And this is just something that hit me, and it's a little off subject, if you will, but it's want to touch on it a little bit because it's something that's relevant in this coming week and slightly relevant in this discussion. So we're talking about people skipping the line and getting special treatment. So I don't know if you've seen this or heard about it. And it hasn't like been come out and been said by the UFC per se, but it's, I guess, I don't want to say leaked, but it's definitely out there, and I've heard it from multiple places. So obviously, Israel Adesanya is fighting this coming Saturday against Dricus du Plessis. And now, just a week and a half ago, they announced that Magomed Ankalaev is going to be fighting Alexander Rakic in Abu Dhabi. So obviously at 205, the logical fight for Alex Pereira was going to be Magomed Ankalaev, but here we are booking him against somebody else. So then there's all the speculation. Does that mean he's going up to heavyweight? What does that mean? You know, there's all these little things. Well, then I just saw a thing or somebody said that they're putting him on ice, if you will, keeping him kind of sitting there until they know what happens this coming Saturday, which basically alludes to the fact that if Izzy wins and beats Dricus, that they're going to try to put Izzy back up against Pereira this time at 205. And to me, I know that's money for them and they see that as money, but to me, that one is one that just, to me, really, I don't even think Izzy should be getting an immediate rematch or getting an immediate title shot again. Look, he lost to Pereira via TKO. He came back, finished Pereira with a brutal KO, but then he got walked down and outclassed by Sean Strickland in a huge, huge upset. And then now he's getting a title shot. And if he wins, we're going to let him go ahead and try for a second time. Granted, he's beat the guy once, but I don't know. It's just weird because if you look at his last 5, he's what? 1, 2, 3. He's 2 and 3 in his last 5, and you're going to give a guy that's 2 and 3 the chance to become a double champ. Like the favoritism there is just absolutely absurd to me. And then you're going to make the guy who's been paying his dues is like on a 9-fight win streak or something like that. And Magomed Ankalaev, you're going to make that guy go fight what I deem to be a potentially difficult matchup in Alexander Rakic. Because Ankalaev doesn't do well with low kicks. That's one of Rakic's best weapons. Rakic is a underrated wrestler in his own way. And Ankalaev isn't even a guy that really tries to wrestle actively. It's almost like a thing he has in his back pocket that he doesn't push for. So you're giving him a very difficult stylistic matchup, in my opinion, one that he could lose when he should be the guy fighting for a title. So he's putting himself at risk from all of a sudden potentially being 2 to 3 fights away from getting a title shot, assuming they even give him. It's like they just don't like the guy. And I know Dana was real pissed when he fought Jan Blachowicz for the vacant title in December of was that December of last year? I think it was. So maybe it was December the year before. I don't know. Sometimes the calendar stuff. But I can't stand favoritism. That's why I really, even though I do think Izzy might very well beat Dricus this coming Saturday, that one just kind of, I want him to lose solely for the fact that I don't think he should be able to skip the line and move up to 205. And I mean, granted, now that means Rakic should be on a 1-fight win streak with a win over Magomed Ankalaev, and he's the guy now in line after coming off of 2 losses, getting a win. I don't know. It's the way this business and this sport works is really, really crazy to me. But that was just a little thing to put in your head. But going back to, spinning off of that again for what's deserved and what's been earned, Tom Aspinall was a co-main event at UFC 304. And, I mean, the dude is... I want to see him get pushed. I want to see him be taken to later rounds, but it's like nobody's been able to do it. And I think... I don't know. I wasn't really that impressed with Jon Jones against Cyril Gane. Yes, he got the first round finish, but Cyril Gane's been shown that he's not a great wrestler, and that's that. Now, do I think it's set in stone that Tom Aspinall would be able to just run through Jon Jones? Not necessarily, but I think he's a very, very terrible stylistic matchup just because of size and frame and speed and youth. Jon Jones is 37 or about to be 37. I just think and then Dana the other day, I mentioned it before recording the interview where he's saying that Tom Aspinall doesn't deserve to fight Jon Jones. Well, here's my thing. Here's my pushback on that. He's the interim champ. Interim champ usually means you get dibs at the title next. And there's only been 3 other fighters besides Tom Aspinall that have defended their interim title or made an attempt. 2 of them did it. 1 of them did not win. One being Renan Barão. He was an interim title holder. Dominic Cruz was champ, got promoted to undisputed because Dominic Cruz got stripped due to being injured. I want to say that Big Nog was one, and then Andrei Arlovsky was one. And Big Nog was the one who did not defend or did not win his interim title defense. But Arlovsky did, and then same thing, got promoted to undisputed. But the point in that is so you've only had 3 other guys do it, right? And this was due to the champ being injured, not the champ's booked against somebody else that hasn't won in like 3 years, like it hasn't fought in 3 years. But then you got guys like Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, trying to think of some other interim title holders recently. Those are the main 2 that I'm thinking of. I know there's got to be somebody else that was an interim title holder recently. John a blank. But either way, those guys won interim titles, and their very next fight was against the champ. The champ didn't go, fight somebody else and make them have to defend. I think it's absurd that he had to defend to begin with, because that's putting something that, contrary to what Dana White thinks, something he's earned on the line. If he had lost to Curtis Blades, then he's pushed back to the back of the line and he doesn't get to fight for a title. He's got to go earn his way back to it, which, not saying he couldn't have done that, but it's just, I think it's absolutely absurd to think that he's not getting the shot. He's having to wait on a guy to fight somebody else that does not deserve it. And I love Stipe. I think he's one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. The favoritism once again, and I think that
I think you're we're in a neighborhood here where we're going to fall back on the biggest star in the UFC is Dana White. Not the fighters. The biggest star the UFC has made is Dana White. Dana White's the guy that's on podcast after podcast after podcast, and everywhere he gets to, come on strong with his own opinion and talk about how he's the expert and how he knows and only he knows. And no one really has the personality or power to take him on, or the platform to really take him on, right? So, like I said, he's a guy too who's been on a 20-year winning streak. I mean, everything he's touched has turned to gold for 20 years. So it doesn't surprise me that he thinks he's right, but he may not be right. And these are very clear examples. Now, one thing before we get into Aspinall about Pereira that I think that people should remember and is worrisome to me about Pereira, other than that, the guy is a stone cold killer. But I think he's had a couple of fights now where he's broken toes. And I think that they actually rushed him back into the rematch with Jiri, for the good of that card. And he kind of did the good soldier thing. And putting him on ice may not be, there's one thing when you're put on ice and you deserve the shot and you're like, I want to fight. You know what I mean? And there's another thing where he did them a favor. Now, taking 6 months off might not be the worst thing for him to get his foot back into a position where it's less vulnerable to breakage again. You don't want to see him go down to like constant foot breaks or anything like that in the future. So that's the one thing. I think at 205, is he moving up? Is ridiculous. I think they've had the idea because he's tall and has a frame that might be suited that, that they've always dreamed of that. And again, Izzy may be a guy. Nigeria is, in Africa, which not a lot of people know about, but is one of the largest economies on that continent. There are billionaire people in that country. And I wouldn't be surprised if he has a big betting public and also a big, following Instagram and that sort of thing. So here's one of those things when we speculate about the UFC's income streams. When Izzy fights, how much money do they make off TV contracts in Nigeria? No one knows. No one knows. But do you think the fights are seen in Nigeria? Certainly they are. This goes back to Kung Lee. All of a sudden, Kung Lee is a big star in the UFC. Vietnam is a country that they probably weren't on TV on until Kung Lee. How much was that TV contract? Those things are not disclosed anyway. So there's a secret reason why they want Izzy and they push Izzy in this fashion. I may have just hit on one of them. The other thing is that he may have some big time bettors that back him, and we've talked a little bit about some of where the high rollers are in this sport, and because they're very invisible. But if you think the UFC doesn't know who they are, and the UFC doesn't, they've shown a tendency to try to monetize and grab a bite of every single aspect of the sport. And now you've got millionaire bettors, and they're just going to be like, oh, no, we don't look at that. So there's a whole netherworld there that somebody should ask some questions about. But those could be the reasons that they push Israel Adesanya, and certain other fighters get a push and others don't.
Yeah, and I know that Izzy was a superstar. I mean, there were all kinds of people that didn't really watch the sport that knew who he was and watched. He's one of those guys that people may not watch fights any other time than when Izzy fights.
Yeah.
Kind of like Conor McGregor had. Mm-hmm.
He's gotten the job done on the social media and things like that. And we know the UFC rewards as well. The problem with Izzy, different than Conor, is when they took Conor and he fought Jose Aldo, did he rise to the occasion? Yeah, he did, obviously. Did Izzy rise to the occasion against Anderson Silva? No, it wasn't a good fight for him. He didn't look good. And there have been other examples of against Pereira. Now he finally broke through and won one against Pereira. But against Pereira, again, that's a fight where Pereira's coming to your sport. Pereira, at this point, has maybe a dozen MMA fights. But when he took on Izzy the first time, he was one of his first 3 MMA fights. That's one that Israel should have won and didn't. So I agree with you completely. Him skipping the line to me is completely undeserved because he hasn't shown me the ability to rise to the occasion.
Yeah. So yeah, because I'm trying to think. So no, that was Izzy in MMA was Pereira's 3rd UFC fight. He was 3-1 in MMA before getting signed to the UFC, but he hadn't fought in MMA. Oh yeah, 100%. And I know that people, when they look at the first fight, well, Izzy was about to win, which is true. But if you look at that fight, the first round was
Jose Aldo was about to win against Conor. He was just about to win.
I mean, it's just one of those things of, yeah, it's interesting, Yeah,
and that's the thing is there's an art and a specialty about closing the deal where you just see, and Pereira has that because Pereira, the coldness and things, I know he's got a couple of blemishes on his record, but for a guy who's still a relative newcomer to the sport, he's operating at a super high level, doesn't seem phased at all. And that's why I think giving him 6 months off, he's already, rumor was, I think he made $4 million for a recent fight. And I don't know how much he made for the Jiri fight recently. So the money for him, my ear to the ground, I don't think he's a huge lifestyle guy like Bigfoot Silva, who bought a Porsche for his wife and a Porsche for his daughter. Things like that. I don't think Pereira's that kind of guy. So I think he's going to be okay monetarily, and he can take 6 months off. I think you give him the respect of letting him get his feet back together.
Yeah, and I'm not opposed to him sitting on the sidelines for a while whatsoever. I think that's 100%. He
And
definitely
you're,
deserves it.
but
He's been a
Israel,
performer.
I think Israel also, to me, it was really unappealing the way he kind of lost the title and then kind of, claimed retirement, that he wouldn't be back. And it just sent this kind of like hissy fit kind of message. You know what I mean? Um, it didn't show me that design. Like Sean Strickland would never, he lost the belt too. He didn't retire and run off and be like, I'm done, blah, 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 blah. Strickland's dying to fight again. And that's kind of what a fight fan would want to see. This guy should have said, I want my belt back.
Yeah.
Sean Strickland, I'm a better fighter than Sean Strickland. I want that guy again. And at that point, he might have deserved a rematch because he
Yeah.
had won several and he was, kind of a good 185-pound champion, plus all the other bells and whistles that we are speculating about. But he didn't. He ran away. So the UFC was forced to go in another direction. So now I would absolutely not cater to him. I think you're absolutely right on that. But if you want, I'll let you comment. But I'm ready to talk Aspinall too. I put it easy behind us and put him at the back of the line.
Yeah, that's my whole opinion. And if he beats Dricus, he needs to. I know he has all kinds of defenses at 85, but he's got bigger problems at 85. He's lapped the division. You've got Kaya Bahia fighting next the weekend after that against Jared Cannonier. He beats Jared Cannonier. He's right there. Brendan Allen's not far behind. He'll be facing Nasruddin Imavov. Those two guys, either of those are fresh matchups. I think they want to give Izzy a immediate title shot after losing to Strickland, whatever. But he has no business moving up to 205. But I digress. So yeah, Tom Aspinall. I think, like I said earlier, he's the interim title holder. He's paid his dues. Interim title holder means you get to fight the undisputed champ. What's probably going to end up happening is if Jon Jones fights Stipe, Jon Jones is just going to end up walking away and he's going to become promoted to undisputed champion. Is probably what's going to happen.
I didn't give myself the name Mystic Miguel. It was given to me. And the reason is what I do have is I do have a good insight into like how the communications with fighters and how things like that work. And also Dana's ego and the power of that ego. And like we've mentioned here, he's the biggest star in the UFC. What this reeks to me of is in the past, when Stipe was asked to step aside, take a little bit of money, let Brock fight, that they promised they'd take care of him. And Dana in his ego made a promise, so now he's going to follow through on it. And that's why he's so hell-bent on making the Stipe fight, even though it's, expiration date 2022 kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Stipe, I think, it behooves, doesn't want to tell him to go scratch because they may eventually throw a lot of money at him. And who's not going to take a $10 million payday or whatever they're going to offer? Stipe was a dominant champion when he was there. He was a good soldier. He steps aside when they ask him to step aside, as opposed different than Jon Jones or any of those guys. You never heard Stipe shitting on the company, in the media or anything like that. He's been nothing but a good soldier. So I could see Dana's ego saying, I made a promise to that guy, I got to come through. And that may be the overwhelming reason why he's going this way. The Jon Jones being motivated by fighting another guy who was a decorated champion and stuff like that. That's on Jon's end. That's Jon's rhetoric. That's not the UFC's rhetoric. That counts. I think what counts here is that they want to reward Stipe for the past because a promise was made. That's just speculation, but I think that's kind of the way it probably goes here. Dana is a guy that has his, personality quirks, but one of them is when he gives a fight, especially dealing with the fighters, he has matchmakers. Very rarely should be dealing directly with fighters, but he gets in there. He likes that. He's got that VIP type ego where he likes to rub elbows with them. And if he makes a promise to him, I think that may be the reason for pushing for a fight. I don't think Stipe needs it. I think Stipe is classy for not telling him to go to hell because they've skipped him over a dozen times. At the end of the day, I'm kidding around because he's a fireman. Yeah, he's out there rescuing kittens. You know what I mean? From trees. He's doing his work. He's moved on in his life. Now he's got money because again, he's another one of those guys that all the read on is that he's got his job, he's got his house, he's got his family. He's not a lifestyle guy out there, throwing $50,000 away in casinos or strip joints or anything like that. So he's already got enough money. He's already got there. The disrespect is enough that now he's gonna have to shut down, leave his family. If he's got kids, when they were 4 or 5 years old, you go away for a 3-month training camp or do your thing where you're not going to be around. Your wife has a little bit of pressure and stuff. But now you're talking about maybe missing graduations if they've gotten older and things like that, missing more quality time with growing children as opposed to when they're, before they're married and stuff. It's going to be harder for Stipe to be motivated to come up, but he's going to have to shut everything down, do a good 3-month training camp. And, you mentioned it. He's one of the greatest of all time. So I'm not going to say that, rust or anything like that, but the mind rust, because he hasn't done that training camp and getting up for it and stuff. I think that's the hard part. I think that he could be a guy that says, okay, I'm signing the contract. You're going to give me $15 million for this fight. I'm going to take it. I'm signing the contract. I'm going to get ready for Jon Jones. I know I can beat this guy. You go into training camp, 2 weeks, and you're like, I don't got it in me anymore. Yeah. That could be what he's facing after such a long layoff, and because he operated at such a high level that you would think he recognizes, man, the effort it takes to get back to that level, I just can't anymore, and that's one of the reasons why I think you don't see him also coming out and stuff, and why they keep pushing this fight. Jones is the guy who's got to get over himself. Jones shouldn't call the shots. And does Aspinall deserve it? Again, that's why I think Dana comes out with this bombastic, nobody can tell him he's wrong kind of way. And I think actually what he's covering there is that he made a promise to a guy. That's just, like I said, speculation, but he made a promise, and he's a guy who keeps his word. He would always say he keeps his word. So that's what I think he's covering there, to the point where he doesn't care if he shits on the guy who's the future, the guy who's his number one contender, holds an interim belt. And if they did Jon Jones and Tom Aspinall properly, maybe they wouldn't fill a 90,000 seat stadium in London, but you could get pretty close to a 50,000 seater. You could make a big goddamn show of that, and if you put McGregor and Chandler under them in that venue, you could up it to a 90,000 seater. It hasn't gone away yet that Aspinall, the British market, the British economy is one of the strongest in the world still. The British market are in fervent, kind of crazy fight fans, like to the point where, and also a big betting public.
Yeah.
You got it all there. There's no reason to mistreat a British guy, except for that he's still less of a star than Dana himself. And Dana loves that ability to just spew and not have anybody call him out on why he could be wrong. But I just pointed out, by crapping on Aspinall, when Aspinall eventually does get that fight, there's going to be people that say, well, Dana said he wasn't that good. Dana said he didn't deserve it. Dana didn't. Why do that to your guy with an interim belt?
Yeah.
You could have easily have said, if my speculation is correct, he could have easily have said, Stipe is an all-time great. We made him a promise that he would get one last shot. We are going to do everything we can to make it happen. And if not, we've got the man, Tom Aspinall, waiting in the wings, and a match for Jon Jones will be made. So that's not what he says.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Jon Jones saying, I got one more match and I'm going to retire and stuff, that's interesting too. Jones might defer with me. He might argue with me that he's the biggest star, not Dana. And the reason is because in his head, he is the biggest star. He's the biggest star in his own world. There's an ego. They're comparably big egos. Dana is a bigger star. There's no doubt. But Jon is a bigger ego. But Jon's not without some sharpness, looking at other aspects of things. And to be honest with you, I think the idea of fighting one more time and retiring, especially with the UFC and this class action lawsuit coming through, that for people that don't watch, there are 1,100 fighters from the UFC's former roster that are suing the UFC in two different versions of a class action lawsuit to try to get more money out of them, saying, that the UFC is kind of a monopoly and paid them.
Mm-hmm.
And the UFC threw $330 million at this lawsuit, and the lawyers and the fighters said, we'll take it, and they were going to settle. And the judge stepped in and said, no, the money's not enough. There's something fishy here. I feel like the fighters don't know what they're getting into. I want this to go to trial. I'm not sure if Jon Jones doesn't look at that and say, what is the end game of a trial? Could a trial actually take down some of the UFC's business practices? To me, in the worst case scenario, a UFC failure in the trial could potentially lead to all their contracts becoming null and void. Now, that's, if you listen to Dana, there's no shot of that happening. I would say that it's a slim chance. But to say no shot, Dana would be wrong again, just like when he's wrong when he says Fedor's not the best. It's okay to be wrong, Dana. It's okay. But there's a slim chance that could happen. The UFC has operated 20 years exactly the way they wanted to do. They've crushed competition. They've crushed T-shirt competition. Now it's all that everybody wears Venom. Every fighter had a choice before that, and now they don't. That's not in the lawsuits that are currently happening, but that's a sign of a monopoly. Mm-hmm. Fighters used to be able to come to the UFC with their own manager, and their own manager would deal with that. Now they're pushed to these other companies. That's a sign of a monopoly. There were companies like Full Contact Fighter and other magazines and media outlets. The media in general was media covering a sport. Now, if you're not an insider with a contact, you're not there. So they've controlled everything. These are the signs of a monopoly. So can that be proven in court? Jon may think, I'll fight one more time, grab another $20 million, then play it out, let another year go by, and see if every contract becomes null and void. And then see if the PFL can set me up with Ngannou. Let's see if Ngannou loses. You know what I mean? But these are the I wouldn't be surprised if Jon's never been the UFC's total company man like that. Mm-hmm. Jon's always had that ego that's enough that he kind of marches to the beat of his own drum, rides his different path, whatever you want to classify it as. And so I'm not sure, why he would think taking more time off or actually retiring at this point in his career is good for him when he still has some monetizable time left. And he's already lost a lot of monetizable time by stupid behavior. So yeah. I think, if he wants to make the most money possible, he may see that if somehow the UFC's monopoly does get broken in this lawsuit, that he would definitely rise to the top as being maybe the number one asset available out there, heavyweight.
Yeah. I guess so. I'm of the belief, and you bring up very valid points, right? It is interesting. There are a lot of things that could happen in the coming 6 months, a year, 2 years regarding this lawsuit. But I'm of the belief, I kind of wonder if he even fights Stipe. Maybe I'm crazy for that one. I'm not even 100% sold that he does. That's just me personally. And hey, I could be totally wrong, just as I've also told many people I know that there's inactivity with I can't even talk today. Inactivity with Stipe Miocic and coming off of a brutal knockout. Granted, he's had time to sit and kind of recover from that as much as you can, right? But I'm not 100% convinced that that fight happens and it's just a night of Jon Jones dog walking Stipe Miocic. I mean, Jon Jones isn't getting younger himself. He's always struggled with guys that are tall and long like himself. Stipe Miocic is a fantastic wrestler. Now, granted, Daniel Cormier was able to pick him up and carry him over his shoulder in their second fight, out-wrestled him, out-hustled him there. So that's not out of the equation that Jon Jones could do the same and submit him. But on the feet, I don't think that fight is as one-sided as some people seem to think it is. But I digress. To me, if that fight happens, which I'm not convinced that it does, I could see the Stipe reigning on everybody's plans as well. But assuming that things go the way that I think they'll go, which is that Jon Jones
Stipe in the Belal role.
Hey, I would love to see it, but I know that Stipe was offered to fight Tom Aspinall for the interim title instead of Sergey Pavlovich, and he turned it down. And I'm not going to say, oh, well, Stipe's afraid of him or anything like that, and I could see your Stipe saying, well, there's more money to be made against Jon Jones and more legacy, if you will. So 100%. I'm with that, but Stipe is at this point 43, 44 years old, maybe 42. He doesn't need to fight again. He goes to beat Jon Jones. I could see him just as easily saying, all right, put my gloves down, walk away. 3-time world champion, that cements his legacy even more, right? But assuming any of those things happen, because I personally, win or lose, regardless of who it is, I don't see either of them fighting Tom Aspinall. I see Tom Aspinall being promoted to undisputed champ. And I want your opinion on this. So he becomes undisputed champ, right? The fight that makes the most sense, he knocked out Pavlovich. He just knocked out Curtis Blades. Jailton Almeida is another fight, another win away from being in the title picture. I don't see anybody else except for what I consider to be the title eliminator fight coming up in Abu Dhabi, which is Cyril Gane versus Alexander Volkov 2. Now, we saw what happened when Tom Aspinall fought Alexander Volkov. He ran through him. Volkov's definitely a little bit of a unique heavyweight in the sense that he's not as plodding as some of the other guys. But the two most light-footed heavyweights are Cyril Gane and Tom Aspinall. And I know that Tom Aspinall will be, I would assume, we'll see how Cyril Gane looks against Volkov, who I do think he beats again. Even though it's 3 rounds, and I want to say he dropped the first round, maybe even the first 2 against Volkov the first time. I need to go back and rewatch that. Either way, I think stylistically, and both from a visual aspect as a fan wanting to watch, I think that fight's pretty interesting because you got 2 huge heavyweights with big wingspans. Obviously, Cyril Gane doesn't hit as hard, or I don't think he hits as hard as Tom Aspinall does. But I think that fight on paper is extremely intriguing because we saw Francis Ngannou struggle to hit Cyril Gane cleanly. Cyril Gane was running around, and it forced Stipe to have to wrestle him, which worked out for him. But I guess what I'm saying is I think that fight is very, very intriguing. I would still lean Aspinall as of right now, but what do you think? Like, what is your thought process on that fight? Because I think it's super, super interesting because those 2 guys are the new generation of heavyweights, and they're the only 2 that move the way that they do. I personally, and I'll go ahead and say this, I don't need to see Alex Pereira move up. I know he's a big dude. He hits super, super hard, but I'm fairly confident that Tom Aspinall would just dive on him and end up submitting him probably in the first round. Now, could I be wrong? 100%. But we saw him eat a big shot, him as in Tom Aspinall, from Sergey Pavlovich early. It would be cool to see Pereira be a guy that touches 3 belts. That would be awesome. I love Pereira. I was a fan. I'm super stoked when they even signed him the first time to fight Andreas Michailidis coming over from kickboxing. Well, he'd been and moved over to the LFA. But I digress. I don't need to see that fight. The fight I want to see is Tom Aspinall versus Cyril Gane. So I'd be curious what your opinion on that is. And maybe you've got a completely different mindset. Maybe you think that Alex Pereira is the fight to make.
The thing about Cyril Gane and Volkov is it's not the right exact word, but I think you'll get the idea is that they're both kind of damaged goods. They don't have that head of steam. I know Volkov's got a 5-fight winning streak, and but Gane's already sort of answered the question of can he fight on the ground? Does he have the mental mindset? Those are all still things that he hasn't definitively put a stop to, like the way Alex Pereira did. When Alex Pereira lost to Izzy, a lot of people might have said, well, he'll go back to kickboxing, not come back. He doesn't like it, this, that, the other thing. You've got guys like, what was the kid's name? Gregor
Gillespie.
Yeah, Gregor Gillespie. Great winning streak, got knocked out, rode off into the sunset. So I want to see them overcome. And between Gane and Volkov is actually got a long record. I remember Volkov as a 220-pound heavyweight, and he's no longer 220 pounds. He's pretty massive. And he's tall, and he's long. Now, tall guys like that tend to get slow, and I think that's why he's been dropped by guys with good hands and stuff, because, they become a little bit of you got a bigger target in front of you, too. But if he can get his game going, he's dangerous to Gane. And him against Aspinall, again, it gives Aspinall a different look. You got to train for a guy 6'8". It makes things a little bit different. That might be a follow-up fight if Jones retires and Stipe doesn't decide to come back. And now you have to the UFC's hand is forced, and they have to give another set of guys the belt.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not convinced. Aspinall is clearly, if you want to rate Jones and Stipe 1 and 2, which, like you said, Stipe has been gone so long, you can't really. Aspinall is clearly the guy. When Dana does a press conference like you recently did, crapping on him, anybody with a clear thinking pattern has to think, why would he do that? Why would he do that? Even if Jones says, I'm not fighting Stipe, I'm not fighting, I'm retiring, then who's going to get the belt? What are you going to do? Call Brock Lesnar again? You have Aspinall sitting there. He's looked the part of a good soldier in that I haven't seen him come out against, the company saying, he's being mistreated or anything like that too badly. So why would you tell him he's not ready? Well, guess what? If Jon Jones doesn't fight and Stipe, that fight doesn't happen, and all those plans that you're pushing for don't materialize, he's clearly at the top of the mountain. So answer me the question, how can you let a heavyweight at the top of the mountain be unprepared and not ready? It's a stupid statement that, among stupid, again, no one calls him out for saying stupid stuff. But this is a good example of Dana saying something stupid. He's taken a guy who's an asset and just derided him because he's so focused on getting what he wants done, which is this fight of legends kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's foolish. Does Volkov Gane winner get Aspinall? And that could be a title shot is Stipe and Jones doesn't happen and neither guy wants to fight again. Yeah, that could very well be you may very well have pointed out what the UFC is going to be forced to do. And what I think you could see happen is that Dana Bitter may make those guys wait even into January, February of next year. And the heavyweight title would sit unused and unworked because Dana's ego works that way. He should have those guys ready and the plan ready to move and get that filled as soon as possible because we know Jon Jones, as good as he is a flake. And you can't, just like Conor, you don't control him you don't control Jon. Jon may very well think, who have his ulterior motives. I laid out one of them that could be potentially, if he's thinking the lawsuit might break his contract and he could make more money elsewhere. He saw Ngannou make more money in him boxing. Maybe he wants to try his hand at something like that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how that will go for him. But again, cashing the paydays is what's important. You know what I mean? So who knows what Jon is thinking? Who knows what he was thinking when he was running from his car, came back to grab something and left, but left $30,000 in drugs and stuff in the car when he hit that woman whose arm he broke, pregnant woman. Who knows what this guy thinks, right? So if that's the case, there's no doubt that Aspinall is the top asset in your heavyweight division. So that's what makes it strange to me. Gane, I would almost pick Volkov in that fight. And I don't know. Again, Gane's another guy he's probably got himself up into the 15-fight neighborhood. But Volkov's a guy that has a lot of fights.
It's like 34, 35, and 8 or something like that.
And I think, even guys, I'm going to look it up here. I think his record was 29-10. I may be wrong, but I'll get it right for you here in a little bit. And the point of that is that those are 38-10. Guys with 10 losses that break through to get a chance, that have some talent, that have put in that level of work, very dangerous. Very dangerous. I'm not saying he's a walkover over Gane, but he's got some physical advantages. Gane counts on his length and stand up. If he can clinch him, knee him, present different pictures of him, I give Volkov a good chance against Gane. And Volkov against Aspinall, he'd have to play that same game against Aspinall, and Aspinall would have to get ready for a game. The other thing about Volkov is, with all those fights, he's 35. 35 is not old for a heavyweight.
No.
Jones, like you said, Jones is older already. Jones doesn't have closing in on 50 fights. This guy's really experienced, and you could say he's waited all his life for this kind of fight. And he's beaten some good people, as well as having his last recent losses. Let's see here: 4, 5, 6, 7. So he's 7-2 in his last 9, and his losses are to Cyril Gane and Tom Aspinall. He took Aspinall 4 minutes, which is more than a lot of people can say. Yeah. So, and sorry, a guy making a U-turn in my yard there, and the dogs went nuts. So yeah, I think it would be an interesting fight, and yeah, I could see why Dana would be disappointed, because it's not a big money fight or anything like that. It's I don't want to say you're starting from scratch in the heavyweight division, but in a way, they put so much into Jones. They've obviously, by this press conference, as the latest indicator, not put a lot of faith in Aspinall, and now you're going to have to count on Aspinall to carry the division. You're kind of starting from scratch in their book. So I could see them waiting until February or March after Dana simmers down a little bit to make that happen. That's exactly what you said about it, why the favoritism absolutely stinks.
Yeah, and the touching on what you were saying about Volkov, something to think about that just kind of dawned on me is his last win was against Tai Tuivasa, and he actually submitted Tai Tuivasa. So he's obviously more known as being a stand-up guy.
No, after he actually beat Pavlovich too.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Recently, because Pavlovich couldn't touch him. Point is, he has a submission win right there, second to last fight. And Cyril Gane's lost twice on the ground, most recently via submission. Now, am I saying this is going to be him wrestling Cyril Gane? Maybe, maybe not. But like you said, he's 35. He's this is pretty clearly a number one contender fight in some form or another, whether you want to call it that. That's what it is. The winner of this fight is going to get a title shot of some sort, most likely. And it's kind of one of those things, if you've fought 48 times, why not? Why? There's the path of least resistance. I'm fairly confident he could take Cyril Gane down if he wanted to. Now, granted, Sergey Spivak was unable to do that, and Sergey Spivak is a wrestler. Maybe Cyril Gane's ground game's gotten better. Who's to say? I mean, it's not like he's an old guy by any means, but yeah, now that you talking, kind of got my wheels turning. I'm gonna have to dig a little deeper tape-wise into that one. But
and you go to motivation, guys. Like Volkov reminds me, and I had to look at his record. I looked back because I felt like I had booked him at some point because I knew him when he was very young. But I think he came as a corner guy for some guys, and I never actually booked him for a fight. But I've watched his whole career through Bellator, through all that, and there has been an aspect of him very dedicated and getting better. So it'll be very interesting to see if he ever can break through to get to the top. He may not. He may not be that. He may just be a workman-like guy. But a good example of a guy that he reminds me of is Alexander Shlemenko. If you remember Alexander Shlemenko, he was a Bellator champion for a while, and he put in a lot of miles and came, from up, a good striker, and learned a lot. And Alexander Shlemenko is a fighter that was a UFC quality guy that never really made it to the UFC. I'm going to look up his record for you here so that I can talk a little bit more about it. But, why he reminds me of Shlemenko, because Shlemenko, after a while, spent a lot of time as the Bellator champion and at fighting at a high level. So, and a guy with slews of fights. As soon as I get his record up here, you're going to see what I'm talking about here. His nickname is Storm, and he ended his career 65-15. So I think that you're talking about guys that, you get up and go to work every day. These guys, especially with that Russian mentality, got up and went to work every day. Owns victories over guys like David Branch, who had some good moments in the UFC. He lost to Gegard Mousasi at one point in his career, which is nothing to be ashamed of. Brandon Halsey, who was one of Bellator's top guys, he lost and then revenged him. He suffered an embarrassing loss to Tito Ortiz in Bellator because Tito was kind of too big for him. But the guys he beat outside of the UFC were a cream of the crop, and he's a guy who fought constantly all the time. And I see a lot of that in Volkov, a guy who would be who, if you say, hey, he fights, and then, hey, we want you to fight the following week, sure, I'll do it. You know what I mean? That type of guy. So Volkov is, I think, exactly the workman-like Russian who isn't an elite, like, jump out of the page at you, but he's been putting in the work like very few other people. So I'll be interested to watch his fight, but that's why I'm a fight nerd. You know what I mean? And then with Dana maybe poo-pooing him or not backing him or not talking well about him, he's going to go under the radar and people are going to miss him unless he actually breaks through. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Jones and Stipe doesn't happen and Aspinall and Volkov winds up being a fight. It could be Gane, but Gane's 12-2. Gane's 12-2. So Volkov was 12-2 when he was 23 years old.
That's crazy. I mean, 48 fights. This will be number 49. He's going to hit 50. I can't imagine he retires after this, win or lose, right? That's insane.
Yeah, and what will happen with him, to be honest with you, because of the lifer kind of, and especially if he doesn't break any money, if let's say he takes a 3-fight losing streak in the UFC cuts him, he'll go and log another 15 fights on Russian shows.
Yeah.
That's what he will do.
like, because there's another one in the UFC currently, Anthony Smith. Anthony Smith's got over 50 fights. That dude's been, I think, fighting as a professional since he was like 16 or 17. Here in Texas, I believe, down in Corpus. Yeah, some of those guys, it's the amount of damage and stuff that they're willing to put their bodies through for something that they love. And like you said, going to work every day for the normal person, them going to fight every day, or in the gym and fighting, staying active, professionally fighting, that is going to work for them. That is their job, that's their profession. I admire guys like that are willing to put in the miles on their records, win, lose, or draw.
Well, a loss is a setback, but there's no question that they're going to stop doing it. It's a setback in pay. It's a setback on your record, obviously, and there's career implications to taking a loss. But I get the feeling Volkov, when he's taking a loss, it was never like, do I belong in this? Is this my sport? That's not a question that comes in Alexander Volkov's mind, in my opinion.
And then somebody that not the record nearly as extensive, right? But somebody that kind of comes to mind when you talk about losses and like getting back up again, is look at Jan Blachowicz. Jan Blachowicz was a guy that came into the UFC. I think he was in KSW, came over to UFC, was, I want to say, on a 3-fight losing streak. Lost to Corey Anderson. I don't want to lie to you. Was Patrick Cummins a 205-pound fighter? I want to say.
Yeah. Patrick Cummins, I think, was actually a heavyweight that came down, because Patrick Cummins, I think, was Daniel Cormier's debut.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. So he was on a 3-fight losing streak, and then, he says that he found the guy that had unfortunately committed suicide, and took the bracelet, carried it around, and equates that, I guess, because it's like a Polish good luck thing, as crazy as that sounds. So he went on, I believe, a 2-fight or 3-fight win streak. Got an arm triangle in the second round over Nikita Krylov, loses against Thiago Santos, and is kind of, still one of those guys that was like, I mean, he was on the verge of getting cut until I think he beat Jimmy Manuwa, was the beginning of that little win streak that it was like a fight or two. Beats Krylov, loses to Santos, and then goes on a little run as an underdog in almost every one of those fights.
Rockhold, Jacare, Corey Anderson, Dominic Reyes, Israel Adesanya.
And he was an underdog against every one of those except Jacare. I think Jacare, he was a pick'em. But he definitely was an underdog against Corey Anderson, which, by the way, is one of my favorite knockouts of all time. I want to say he was a slight dog against Rockhold. He was definitely an underdog against Dominic Reyes. He was like a plus 240 against Reyes. And then same thing against Izzy. And then he's a favorite over Glover and gets rear naked choked, which, it happens. But it's, these guys that have the, get knocked down, get back up, or get knocked down twice, get back up 3 times, or whatever the saying is. It's always impressive to me. But unfortunate.
I think, just to throw that out there for the fans, I think it's something that you want to consider an X factor for a lot of the Eastern European guys. Not all of them fit into that mold, but a lot of them do, because life is harder and different there. And Blachowicz is not Russian, he's Polish. But, in World War II, those guys were charging tanks with horses. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, come on. It's they grow up, life is harder, and they're willing to sacrifice differently. So
yeah.
Blachowicz, I think, was also, he's probably been one of my favorite champions of the last bit of probably decade, because of that, overcoming that losing streak and coming back and winning it and beating good guys and stuff like that. And in my history, I have got a lot of respect for Polish fighters that I've booked and things like that. I've had some guys that, one guy actually made the UFC for a couple of fights towards the end of his career, and he was older and he put in a lot of miles and stuff. But this kid fought his first fights at 16, on Saturday fought. On Monday, went to high school with his black eye. That's the kind of start a lot of these guys get. They're just built from a different mold, and I love them. So Blachowicz, Volkov are guys that I enjoy watching for those reasons, and I think this is a spot where the UFC, with their marketing machine of liking the market, whatever, misses an opportunity to market guys for what they really are.
Yeah, and it's funny you said that about Jan Blachowicz being one of your favorite recent champs. I'll have to pull him out for you when we record next time. I actually just got my hands on some shorts of his. Actually, the shorts he wore against Nikita Krylov, and I've been wanting to get something from Jan Blachowicz for a while when they popped up. I jumped on the opportunity very, very quickly. I think the guy had posted them, and they were basically sold to me within 20 minutes at best. I was very shocked when I saw him. I was very stoked to get him. But unfortunately, I have to run. I have an event that I'm supposed to be attending tonight at church, and I didn't realize what time it was, and I, for some reason, thought it started at 6. It actually starts at 5. But I'm stoked that we got to do this again. I want to do it again very, very soon. Maybe if it's not next weekend, the following week after.
Yeah, you had mentioned Wednesdays are good for you. Wednesdays are okay for me as well. Now that I'm kind of settled in the new house and stuff, hey, I'm available. And as always, it's been a great conversation. Just a lot of fun.
Yeah, it always is. I always enjoy it. You've got definitely a different outlook and insight on things than I do, and pretty much everybody else that I know. So I'm always appreciative to hear you speak and for you to share your knowledge with myself and everybody who's watching. So as I always say, everybody, check out Miguel Ituarte's YouTube channel, the MMA Museum, right?
MMA Museum is what you can search. You can it's at MMA Collector 74 is what you want on YouTube as well. We do long-term interviews. I just posted this week interview with Dean Thomas, who is original OG and is still in the business, an ESPN employee, analyzing fights and things, and an old friend of mine. And I think that's one of the things that you'll enjoy about the interviews is that it's kind of a personal touch. He was like, "Well, I haven't seen you in a long time," and we get right down to business talking. You get them as honest as possible. If you look back at my history of interviews, I've cracked a bunch of guys and gotten them to cry on the interviews. And it's because if you're there, you remember things that will give you memories, give the fighters memories that, and their willingness to share. It's not just your standard interviews. So I'm proud of them.
Yeah. I've watched a few of them, and I saw the Den Thomas would pop up on my my YouTube feed, and I've been meaning to watch it, and I'll probably give it a listen this week at work while I'm doing some stuff. But anyway, cool. I'll drop the link to that in the bio here on YouTube. As I always say, make sure you share with your friends. Oh, of course.
And this is podcast number 7. Let's give this guy some support as well too, because he is putting in the work, and as a collector, buying up shorts and things like that. Again, I think that's another aspect of the UFC's monopoly, in that a lot of the freedom of that type of collecting and things like that is taken away. So you're operating in a very difficult game, and you're doing an ace job. My sponsor, Ed Tyson, another collector in the modern game, bringing the old school type of attitude of, hey, I want something from John. I want something from this guy. And hey, just the relentless pursuit, and very, very proud to work with you guys.
Yeah, man. So make sure you guys share it with your friends, pass it along, like, subscribe. Be sure to like and subscribe on Miguel's channel. As I always say, keep LIVIN living, and we will catch you next time. Later.